Hello, welcome to the Jon Kiper Show. I'm Jon Kiper. You've made it. Here we are. So I wanted to do a solo show because I just want to catch you guys up on the campaign, let you know how things have been going, and just let you know I'm still here. So it's been a couple weeks since we abandoned the Democratic Party and are forming our own party, Community First. And I'm not going to lie, it's been tough. It's been tough for a number of reasons, but I think one of the hardest things has been that a lot of people don't seem to understand the dynamics of the race. They don't really understand, primarily the fact that the governor in New Hampshire for 100 years has won a second term, an incumbent governor. They almost always win a second two-year term. The only time that didn't happen in the entire last 100 years was when John Lynch defeated Craig Benson. But Craig Benson was a very unpopular Republican. I remember actually at the time when he was running for re-election, the Scammons in Stratham did not endorse him. And I remember my boss at the time saying, that's a big deal because they generally will get behind whoever the Republican is. And he was like, Benson's probably not going to win. And he didn't. But it's just unlikely. So when I was running as a Democrat, I was trying to say, hey, it's very unlikely that any of you establishment Democrats are going to be able to beat Kelly Ayotte. Because frankly, you're not bringing to the table enough of a difference. One lobbyist versus another lobbyist, what's the difference for the average voter? And that's why I thought I could actually beat Kelly Ayotte as a Democrat, because I was just going to represent a different group of people than most of the candidates that the Democrats have propped up over the last decade or so for governor, who have all lost, of course. But the Democrats didn't want to do that. And that's fine. I was kind of tired of trying to work with them. They had really, but when I say they, it's important you understand. I mean the leadership, the elected folks, the people who run the party, not the everyday folks who show up to the town and county meetings. Those were actually the people who I was returning to the party for. What was them, the people that do the work of the party, that knock the doors and make the phone calls, and who, frankly, I think are getting led astray by the leadership year in and year out. And that's what I was hoping to fix. As governor, and also I ran for chair of the party back in February because I thought the leadership was flawed then. And we had the same leader, Ray Buckley. So I just saw no world in which the Democrats were going to be able to win this race, with me or without me, because they just didn't really want to support an outsider. So, we decided to go this other route. And I've just been really surprised by how many people don't understand that Kelly Ayotte is almost definitely going to get reelected. And I know some of the Democrats have tried very hard to paint a picture that she was, beatable. And maybe in a perfect scenario, possibly. But the fact is, it's just unlikely right now. And the polling reflects this. I think this last poll that came out, Cindy Warmington was some 15 points behind Kelly, maybe more. I can't remember, maybe a little less. But it was at least 10. So just unlikely she's going to close the gap. And frankly, the more people learn about Cindy Warmington, the less I think they're going to like her once they realize, hey, she was a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma, which is, again, why I didn't want to run in a primary against her. In 2024, she put in $1 million of road money. I just couldn't compete with that. Her husband is on the board of the New Hampshire Democratic Party. How would I compete with someone who's that connected to the party? So we've decided to pivot to running under this independent party, this Community First party. And right now we are gathering signatures. And I'll be honest with you, it's slow. It's slow and it's hard. It's hard to get these signatures. And an interesting thing has happened recently. The legislature has changed the date of the primary for 2028. This won't go into effect this year, but for 2028, the primary will be in June instead of September. Now, for a lot of reasons, this is a good thing. It gives more time for the candidate that wins the primary to set themselves up to win the general. And it also means that, people have to start campaigning earlier, presumably. But one thing that it does that a lot of people probably didn't think about is that it puts the signature requirement, if you want to run third party, The signatures are now due at the beginning of April because they just pushed all the dates back. The problem with this is it means that you only have January, February, and March to collect signatures. Now, January, February, and March, I'm sure you know, are fairly rainy, snowy seasons. It's almost impossible to collect signatures in the rain and snow if you're standing in front of Market Basket or somewhere like that, which traditionally where the paid folks who collect these signatures go to get them. They go to like Market Basket. They wait outside. You've seen these people probably before. And I talked to a guy who has done this signature collecting for money. He was offering his services. He's done it for libertarians and for various ballot initiatives in Massachusetts. And he said that after 2026, it's going to be effectively impossible for a third-party candidate to get on the ballot. Because if you can't get signatures in the rain and the snow, and that's the only time you're allowed to do it, it's just not going to be possible. So that makes our job a little bit more important, frankly, and a little bit more difficult. Because we've got to do it in 2026. There may not be the possibility of it happening in 2028. And again, we don't have the money to pay people to collect signatures. So we are relying on volunteers and on you, the public, to fill out these forms. And it's quite an interesting predicament that we have, okay? Because our whole campaign has just been built on social media, making videos and, posting on social media, going to events, making videos there and posting on social media. And this is something that we can't zhuzh it online. We can't just do it online. It has to be, the signatures have to be what they call wet, meaning it has to be physically signed and then sent to me, one way or the other. So we can't just online hack this. We have to go up to people in person and say, will you sign this form? Or ask people to fill it out at home and send it in, which is what we've been doing. And it's been slow, let's just say that, in getting signatures to come in. Trying to get someone to do this one little thing, which before I thought 3,000 signatures, no big deal. I know thousands of people in Newmarket. Surely we can get them all to sign the form. But it's a lot harder than I thought to get someone to print out a form, sign it, and mail it in. You'd think it wouldn't be 10 minutes it's going to take, but no. It's been really hard. And at the same time, this has been kind of funny because I've had this conversation with a couple of people about Cindy Warmington's performance within the Democratic circles. This one woman, I was in Concord, and this woman told me that Cindy had spoken to her Democratic town meeting recently. And when pushed as to how Cindy Warmington, as governor, would raise new revenue to fix the myriad of problems in our state, education or funding Planned Parenthood or what have you, Cindy basically said, oh, well, we need to rely on the federal government to provide that funding. I mean, can you believe that? The federal government, we're going to rely on Donald Trump, the guy who's cutting food stamps, the guy who's cutting, the Department of Education. He's cutting everything. We're going to rely on him to fund our state. This is not serious, guys. And this woman, Cindy Warmington, was overwhelmingly endorsed by the leadership of the New Hampshire Democratic Party. And somebody else told me that she came to their town and that she just really had nothing to say. She talked about housing, but offered no solutions. She talked about funding issues, but offered no solutions. And ultimately, she has no platform. And this is what's kind of funny, because she had gotten in the race, if you don't recall, right when the stuff with the ICE facility in Manchester was really heating up. And I think she thought, as did I, that there was no way Kelly could stop this ICE facility. And I think she thought, hey, I can ride this issue all the way to November. They'll be protesting, and I'll be right there, and I'll be condemning this, bad facility. And then Kelly pulled the rug out from under her. And now I don't think she has anything to run on. And I think it's really apparent. So this is really the Democrats' problem in New Hampshire. They can't, or they don't think that they can win elections by proposing new revenue. I think that's what they're afraid of, right? They say the Republicans will just say that we're tax and spend Democrats. So the leadership has already said we don't support an income tax. Okay. Cindy Warmington has said she doesn't support income tax or a sales tax or reinstating the interest and dividend tax. So that's basically no new revenue on the table. And this is inherently the problem, because if the Republicans, when they're in power, they cut taxes, cut revenue, and the Democrats are afraid to raise new revenue, so the revenue just stays the same, on the whole, revenue goes down on the statewide level, which means your property taxes go up and departments like Department of Health and Human Services are underfunded. And then we get lawsuits via, such as the YDC lawsuits, where, there's children that were abused in our YDC system and are now getting millions and potentially billions of dollars in lawsuits. So we're in this fiscal doom loop, and the only way out of it is new revenue. But the Democrats think they can't propose new revenue. The Republicans are obviously not going to propose new revenue. And that's really where I thought I can't work within the Democratic Party because of New Hampshire. This is very specific to New Hampshire. Because if the Republicans are against new revenue and the Democrats are also against new revenue, they're basically the same thing. I mean, the whole point has been that the Republicans want to cut taxes for wealthy people and cut regulation, and the Democrats want to increase taxes for wealthy people and have some regulations over these businesses. And if the Democrats fail to fight for that, what are they doing? What are they here for? Now, what they'll say to you, and this is true, is they will defend LGBTQ rights, they will defend abortion rights as best they can with no money. They will defend, guns, they will ban guns, whatever. But the thing you've got to remember about those issues, okay, guns, LGBTQ, abortion, none of these affect the donors. And that's essentially who the Democrats are working for. And this is it's right there out in the open. Okay, and I can give you actually one really specific example. In the last race in 2024, sort of out of nowhere, Cindy Warmington and Joyce Craig both started talking about how they wanted to ban AR-15s. Now, I just thought this was a stupid thing to bring up because there's no one in New Hampshire who's sitting on the sidelines saying, oh, if only Democrats would be more anti-gun, then I would vote for them. Like, they already have those people. So all you're doing is pushing away independent voters, and I know these people exist because I've talked to them in my restaurant, who align with Democrats on every issue, but don't want to see their guns banned. They like guns. Some of them moved here because of the gun laws. And so they vote for Republicans for governor, even though they might vote for Democrats for Congress or Senate or whatever, but, they are adamantly in favor of having and owning guns. And so that's why when Cindy and Kelly brought this up, I thought, this is weird. Why would they do this? I mean, even the legislature, the New Hampshire Democratic House members and Senate members would never propose a ban like this because they know it would never happen. The gerrymandered Senate, it just would never happen. It just doesn't even make any sense. So I said to a friend, why would Joyce Craig and Cindy Warmington be proposing something that, frankly, is going to make them potentially unelectable? Because if this group of people that are potentially gun-owning, independents that might swing Democrat, if they're not going to vote for them, they may have just lost. My friend said, well, it's probably because they're taking money from outside organizations, outside donors from Massachusetts and California that have these type of gun bans, and that money came on a condition that they push this legislation and then they get the money. So we're in this position where if the politicians are willing to take money that makes them unelectable, what's the point of the money? You just made yourself unelectable. And I saw this firsthand, and I really want to tell this story because it's important that you understand how this works from the inside out and why I ultimately had to leave the Democratic Party because of fundraising and the way the system works, the way the donors work. So several months ago, we got this check in the mail for $3,000. And it was very strange. It came with this sort of boilerplate letter printed out and said, confirm that you got this check because we could send you more money. We thought, oh, isn't that nice? Now, around this same time, we'd gotten $10,000 from Jennifer Pritzker, who was the only trans billionaire in the world. And the interesting thing about Jennifer's money is that she made this donation to us and then did not ask for anything. Like, literally, I wanted to talk to her, thank her, ask her if she has other friends, if, how we get more money or whatever. And couldn't even get through it to her. She's too busy. She has a whole department that just writes checks for politicians like me and doesn't ask for anything. So I thought maybe these $3,000 that came from these random folks, I think they were in DC, maybe it's the same type of money, like no strings attached, right? Fingers crossed, no strings attached. And so we got this one check, and my campaign manager followed up with their accountant, who had been the one that sent it. It was his address. We kind of looked him up to see what was going on. And it turned out that they were just former, they had worked for, I think maybe the George Bush senior administration. One of them had worked for them, and now they were wealthy business folks, and this is kind of what they did, is fund campaigns. And so they followed up, and we kept in touch with them. But they followed up, and this was probably a couple months ago, and they said, hey, we want to have a Zoom meeting with you, one-on-one, to talk about your campaign and potentially more money. And so we had this Zoom meeting. It's this elderly couple. They're probably in their late 70s, maybe even 80s, and they're accountant. And it was so bizarre because the guy says to me, he says, I'm going to give you some advice. You don't have to take my advice if you don't want to, but you should. Meaning, if you take my advice, we're going to give you money, right? And he pointed out he has donated to other Democrats around the country and even to Maura Sullivan in our state who's running for Congress. And so we really like her. We think she's going to win. And so we start talking. They say, look, the guy says, don't talk about taxing the rich. And he proposed this idea. He's like, what do you need money for? I'm like, well, funding the schools. He's like, well, just do a bond. Just get out a loan to fund the schools. And I'm thinking, how is that a solution to our school funding problem, to get out a loan? Like, it's structural. This isn't a one-time deal. We need permanent funding mechanism for our public education. And I kind of just said, okay. And he's trying to do the math on how much this bond would need to be. And I'm like, all right. He said, but don't say tax the rich, whatever you do. I said, okay. And then a little while later, he goes, don't talk about the environment. Don't talk about global warming or climate change. It's not a good topic. Don't talk about that. It's like, okay. And they said, don't talk about bipartisanship. It's not a good one. And I'm like, okay. And the funniest part is that as we were finishing off the Zoom, the wife didn't realize that I was still on the call, even though we'd said goodbye. And she said, so do you think he's going to do it? And they look at her and go, do what? And she goes, change his whole platform. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that because I don't think it's a good idea. And I'm not going to stop saying tax the rich just because rich people are giving me money. But this is the conversation that is happening between donors and candidates all over this country on a way bigger level all of the time. Okay, so you just need to know that this is how it is. And so I was just so turned off by that conversation. And a couple other donors who had given me not a lot of money, but like $1,000 were constantly, not constantly, but had messaged me and were trying to sort of steer the campaign one way or the other. And they really felt like they had bought my time, that they had bought some input into how I ran the campaign and what we did. And it was eye-opening, to say the least, that this is how it worked, that we just, it was literally just give me money and I'll say whatever you want, So that really turned me off of the whole thing. And I was like, I don't want to, like, if to win a Democratic primary, I have to do what these people say and stop talking about tax the rich, then I don't think I want to win a Democratic primary. I would rather work on this much bigger and better goal of building a new political party. So that's really what this is about, is a balance to the other two parties. I mean, imagine if in 2024, people are mad at Joe Biden because of inflation and the economy. And, they don't love Trump, but he's the only alternative. Imagine a world in which we had three parties, and in which disgruntled Democrats and Republicans don't switch sides or don't sit out the vote, but they have another alternative to go to, the Community First Party, a party that's just focusing on your local community, in a way that's bipartisan. Like, I thought of this line the other day, that we would be, Community First Party is fundamentally a nonpartisan political party. We are nonpartisan. We don't want to fight. We just want to get improvements for our communities. That's it. Because I was thinking about, the way that my community functions and how, when we come together, like when I volunteer at the local community church to feed volunteers or to feed people, I'll be talking and cooking with a guy who I know is a Trumper. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Our mission is feeding hungry people. It's irrelevant. And a lot of times when, we have town council meetings or issues around town, the lines aren't Republican versus Democrat. It's much different. It's much more blurred, generally. And same with, with Little League or something. Like when we work together for, coaching or helping out with the team, we don't talk about politics. That's not the point. The point is just making our community better. And that's really what we want to do with the Community First Party, is force politicians rather, to be constantly having to think about their community. And if we're not even maybe winning elections, but we're at least at the table screaming about these issues, I think we can make a difference. And that was really the big lesson from 2024 was, they weren't really talking about housing before I got into the campaign. And I got in there and I was able to push the conversation towards the things that I thought were important for my community. And I think that's something that the Community First Party can do all over the state. And frankly, all over the country, if we can get this movement going. So that's really, I think important for people to understand. Now, I want to dig in a little bit deeper into the financial problems in New Hampshire, because I don't think if you weren't paying a lot of attention, this happened very slowly, okay? And this is what's basically been happening. In the year 2000, the state had decent revenue coming in, okay? And around that same time, a little later, the Free State Project started moving into the state and started really getting involved in politics. And I don't think it's any coincidence that over the Free State Project's tenure involved in New Hampshire politics, they have been cutting taxes for big corporations and for wealthy folks. And they've done that a number of ways. The first way they did it in the early 2000s, and actually this was kind of before the Free Staters were around, so it was happening anyway, but I think they accelerated this cut in taxes for the wealthy. And the first tax that they cut in the year 2000 or the early 2000s, was the inheritance tax. Now, it was a very generous inheritance tax. It did not affect a lot of people, but it brought in revenue, brought in millions of dollars of revenue. And something that you need to know about inheritance taxes is that they have existed forever, like literally forever. I did some research and there was inheritance taxes back in ancient Egypt, back in ancient Mesopotamia. And the reason for inheritance taxes is because the king knew, he's like, if I let these folks inherit all this wealth, eventually they're going to have more money than I do, and they're going to take over the system. So we got to keep it even so we don't end up with this aristocracy that is able to control the state. And so that was really why we had inheritance taxes. And the one in New Hampshire, I think it started in 1800s or something that they got rid of. They labeled it death tax, even though, again, it really did not affect that many people. You had to have a lot of money. I don't even think it affected relatives. It was just, if you inherited something, millions of dollars or $1 million property, you would have to sell a chunk of it or give a chunk to the state. And so that was the first one. And then beginning around 2016-ish, they really started cutting the business taxes. And they did this a little bit at a time for several years, through several election cycles, through several legislative cycles, and really just hollowed out the revenue that's coming into the state. And the business taxes they were cutting, it wasn't for little restaurants like mine, okay? It was for really big companies that, frankly, weren't threatening to leave. The taxes weren't really high before. They just made them really, really low. So they cut the business profit tax, the business enterprise tax, and then the cherry on the top was eliminating the interest and dividends tax. Now this tax, I know this is boring. I really hope that you can follow. The interest and dividends tax was established in 1923, I believe. And it really was mainly on people with value that were, in the $2 million range in terms of assets and income. Like, it was hitting upper incomers almost exclusively. Somebody said to me at one point, think about how much money the Sununu family alone would have benefited from the cut and the removal of the interest and dividends tax. And the issue is that all of these taxes together have resulted in estimated nearly $1 billion in reduced money that's going into the state. And so what happens is when the state of New Hampshire doesn't have this money, it can't help the towns fund their schools or fund water treatment plants or fund roads or any of the things that the towns have to pay for. And so therefore the towns have to raise property taxes. So all that happened, the revenue, the money coming in really didn't actually change all that much. It just went from big corporations paying less and you and your property taxes and your neighbors paying more. That's just what happened. Okay, the money had to come from somewhere. And this is really the bottom line that I don't think the Democrats functionally understand. And the Republicans definitely don't either. What we're doing doesn't make any sense, okay? To cut taxes for, let's say, YDC, okay? To cut taxes and then we lose funding for YDC. We don't have as much money to fund the supervision of that facility and properly care for those kids. Now we're going to pay over $1 billion in lawsuits. Like, there's just a cost to running a state. And if you don't have enough money, there's going to be lawsuits. So what we're doing right now is we're really just being penny wise and pound foolish. We're not thinking about the future. We're not investing in the future. And our kids, if they can even afford to live here anymore, are going to have to pay for the things we didn't invest in. The roads, the bridges, the dams, the schools, all of these things that we don't have money for because the Republicans, and with some help from the Democrats, cut taxes for the wealthy and for the corporations. And I say some help from the Democrats because in, I think it was 2015, 2016, Maggie Hassan was governor. And part of the budget deal was that she signed in these reductions in the business taxes. And this was the logic. And it does make some sense, I will say that. The logic was, we have a lot of money coming in. So why don't we lower the rate of business taxes so that, because we're getting more money than we need, sort of, basically. But what they didn't do is say, okay, if the amount of money that we need goes, or that we're getting in goes down, we need to have the rate go back up to where it was. They didn't do that. They just made it go one way. So it went down and never went back up. So fundamentally, if we want a proper state, we need more revenue coming in. So what am I proposing? Pretty basic. An interest and dividends tax, let's bring that back, and let's make sure it applies exclusively to the wealthiest people in our state. Let's raise those business taxes back up to what they were in the early 2000s. Let's bring back the inheritance tax on very wealthy estates. And also, I would like to see a tax on second homes that are owned by multimillionaires that live out of state. They did it in Rhode Island. They call it the Taylor Swift tax. They've done it in some other states as well. So we can do this. We can tax the rich, and that's really what this is all about. We've got to tax the rich because we've got to bring down inequality. Why do we need to bring down inequality? Because if we do not bring down inequality, we are going to see social cohesion fall apart. And you're already beginning to see this. Inequality is the problem, okay? Taxing the rich is the only solution. There is no other option, okay? And we are not doing this just because we need the money, although we do. We're doing this because when the rich get too rich and the poor get too poor, you have a civil war, you have a revolution, you have something very bad that happens. This is historically true. It happened in Rome, it happened in France, it happened in many other countries that got to this point where the middle class basically evaporated. And the people at the bottom got angry about it and they rose up. FDR knew this during the New Deal. He signed that in because millions of people were joining the Socialist Party and the Communist Party. And he said, hey, we are going to have a socialist communist revolution on our hands if we don't give the people a little bit of socialism, i.e. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And so they did that as a way to bring the socialists into the Democrats' coalition. And this is what's really important, is the Democrats right now are not holding together the coalition. They do not care that progressives are threatening to lead. They don't care that progressives didn't want to vote for Kamala Harris because of Gaza and these other issues. They really are not throwing progressives any sort of concessions to keep them in the party. Instead, they're trying to win over Republicans like Liz Cheney. It doesn't make any sense. And also, a very important thing to understand is progressive messaging works a lot better when it's not coming from a Democrat. And this has been studied. There's been a number of people that have figured this out through talking to conservatives. That if you talk about universal health care or paid family leave, if it's an independent politician or someone, even a Republican, but not a Democrat, who is saying these or proposing these ideas, they are much more amenable to it on the right. So, moral of that story is we need more revenue. We got to tax the rich. That also is a bipartisan statement. Republicans, I think about 60% of Republicans approve of taxing the rich, which is why I like to say it. And ultimately, we need more revenue in New Hampshire. The Democrats aren't proposing it. The Republicans aren't proposing it. That's why the Community First Party is here. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you.